This session will provide an introduction to the IBM Wheelprinter E and show the location of the serial number and product codes. This is the IBM Wheelprinter E. The IBM Wheelprinter E is a bidirectional impact letter quality printer that can print in 4 pitches, 10, 12, 15, and proportional spacing at a speed of 16 characters per second. The printer provides these features: backspacing, horizontal tabbing, automatic underlining, and changeable type styles. The Wheelprinter E has a large selection of type styles and special print wheels available. Supply items also include 3 ribbon types: Easy Strike Correctable, Easy Strike Multi-Purpose, and Easy Strike Fabric. This printer attaches to the IBM personal computer and other desktop computers that use a parallel interface. The standard paper feed capability is single sheets of paper. There are 2 optional paper handlers available: a pinwheel form feeder, shown here, and a sheet feeder. The machine type, plant code, and serial number are located at the left side of the bottom pan. A power switch controls the power to the printer. The paper release lever and the paper bail are used to align and hold the paper. The control panel is a self-contained unit consisting of 5 control buttons and 5 LEDs. The control buttons are used to set up the printer for printing. The buttons are Stop, Start, Paper Up, Paper Down, and Form Feed. The indicator LEDs are the Ready LED, the Online LED, the Ribbon LED, the Wheel LED, and the Paper LED. These lights show the operating status of the printer and the error codes. The printer consists of these areas: the control panel, the transport print mechanism, the paper feed mechanism, the electronics, the function board and the printer board, and the power supply. This session will cover the location and function of the operator controls and the operator tasks. When the operator turns the power switch to the on position, the printer performs an internal check called the power on self-test. During this test, the indicator lights turn on. When post is complete, only the Ready and the Online LEDs are on. This indicates the printer is online and ready to print. Online means the printer will accept print commands from the host system. Offline means the printer will not accept print commands, and the operator control buttons on the control panel are active. Paper can be loaded with the printer online or offline. Position the paper behind the platen and pull the paper bail forward. The semi-automatic paper insertion will feed the paper to the first writing line. If you fail to push the paper bail to the rear, it will move back automatically as the paper feeds. The stop button changes the printer from being online to offline. When the stop button is pressed, the carrier moves approximately 5 inches away from the left side, and the online light goes off. The stop button also functions as a code button. When you hold the code button depressed and operate the paper up, paper down, or form feed buttons, these buttons perform a second function. These are micro up, micro down, and set first writing line. The start button changes the printer from being offline to online. When the printer goes online, the carrier moves to the left margin and the online light turns on. The paper move buttons are active only when the printer is offline. The paper feeds up one line each time the paper up button is operated and repeats when the button is held for more than 1/2 second. The paper moves down one line each time the paper down button is pressed and will repeat when held depressed for more than 1/2 second. Press code plus the paper up button to move the paper up 1/96 of an inch for each depression. Code plus paper down moves the paper down 1/96 of an inch for each depression. Repeat paper feed starts when the switches are held for more than 1/2 a second. When the form feed button is depressed, the printer will advance to the first writing line of the next form. Code plus the form feed button sets the current writing line as the top line of the form. The ready and online LEDs stay on when the printer completes the power on self-test. When the online LED is on, the printer is online. When the online LED is off, the printer is offline. The ribbon LED turns on when a ribbon error occurs or at the end of the ribbon. The wheel LED turns on and the beep sounds 3 times when there is no print wheel installed. The paper LED works when one of the optional paper handlers is installed. The paper LED comes on when the paper sensing device in the paper handler tells the printer it is printing on the last sheet of paper. The printer will print until the end of the last sheet, then goes offline, and the beep will sound 3 times. The host system transmits data faster than the printer can print, so the input from the host is stored in a buffer on the function board. To cancel a printing operation and clear the buffer, press the stop button to stop the printing, then press the form feed button to move the paper to the top of the next form. Now, press and hold the code button while pressing start. Now you may send new information to the printer. Page length and other format changes are made by moving the dual inline package switches. To change the position of any switch, turn the power switch off and use a ballpoint pen to move the switch. A chart in the Guide to Operations lists the functions and the switch positions. This completes the explanation of the operator control buttons and LEDs. Stop the tape and return to your workbook. There are 3 tests to help the operator with problem determination. They are the power on self-test, the printer self-test, and the printer diagnostic test. Each time the printer is turned on, it runs a power on self-test. This test is an important diagnostic aid. When the power switch is turned on, the first thing that happens is the print wheel moves slightly. This slight movement is important and must be recognized as part of the diagnostics in the hardware and service manual. Let's look at this again. After this slight movement, the print wheel spins approximately 3 turns to home the print wheel. As the print wheel is spinning, the carrier moves to the left frame, then moves to the right slightly and stops. During post, all the LEDs are on. If no failure is detected during this test, the printer will either go online with the ready and online LEDs on, or offline with either the ready, ribbon, wheel, or paper LED on and 3 beeps. This indicates an operator correctable error. If a non-correctable error is detected during the test, the printer will beep and the LEDs will flash. Let's watch as the machine completes a normal power-on self-test. The printer self-test prints all the characters on the print wheel to verify that the printer is functional and to identify any print quality problems. To initiate the printer self-test, hold the code button and turn the power switch on. The printer self-test will repeat until an error occurs, or the test is stopped by turning the power switch off to exit the test. To run the printer diagnostic test, press and hold the paper down button and position the power switch on. When the printer beeps, release the paper down button. The printer will run a power-on self-test, the carrier will move to the center, and the ready light will blink. Now, remove the ribbon cassette. We will do the end of ribbon sensor check. Use a 6-inch steel rule to block the end of ribbon sensor. When the EOR sensor is blocked, the ribbon LED is off. When it is not blocked, the ribbon LED is on. The static LED checks in this test will be included in your reading assignment as we continue in the workbook. This session will cover operator tasks such as changing ribbon cassettes, print wheels, installation of the form feeder and sheet feeder, and the loading of continuous forms. With the power switch on, press the stop button to place the printer offline. The carrier will move approximately 5 inches from the left side. This gives you access to the ribbon. Raise the top cover, push the ribbon latch to the rear, and lift the ribbon cassette out of the machine. The manual ribbon advance allows the operator to advance the ribbon by turning the dial clockwise. Replace the ribbon by placing the locating tabs into the bracket on the ribbon plate, then snap the ribbon cassette into place. Close the top cover, then press the start button to place the printer online. To change the print wheel, press the stop button to place the printer offline. To remove the print wheel, pull back on the selection plate and lift the print wheel straight up. Print wheels come in 4 different pitches, 10, 12, 15, and proportional spacing. The print wheels also come in a variety of type styles. Pitch, type style, and reorder number information is located in the upper right corner of the print wheel. Install the print wheel in the machine with the IBM logo facing you. Pull the selection plate back and place the print wheel in the machine. When the print wheel is in place, allow the selection plate to return to its normal position. When you have completed a print wheel change, press the start button to place the printer online. The pinwheel form feeder is an optional feature which is installed by the operator. To install the form feeder, first remove the paper table and pull the paper bale forward. Then place the latches over the platen shaft. The right bracket fits over this gear on the platen shaft. Rest the form feeder on the rear cover, then push the latches to the locked position. The paper out switch connects to the printer through this cable. Connect the cable to the paper handler connector at the rear of the printer. To load continuous forms in the printer, first, place the printer offline. Place the continuous form paper behind the printer. Check that the paper release lever is to the rear, then move the paper bale toward the front. Lift the paper sensing guide up, and insert the paper over the roller and under the crossbar. Then guide the paper over the lower form feed guide until the paper reaches the platen, then release the paper sensing guide. Use the paper up button to feed the paper until it extends past the pinwheel assembly, then move the paper release lever forward. Open the pinwheel covers, lift the locking tab, and move the pinwheels left or right as you position the paper so the holes fit over the pins in both pinwheels. Then close the pinwheel covers. Gently pull back on the rear of the paper to remove any buckles from the paper, then push down on the locking tabs on the pinwheels. Push the form feed button to see how the paper feeds to the next form. This completes the pinwheel form feeder installation. The Wheelprinter E is also available with a sheet feed. To install the sheet feed, place the printer offline and turn the power off. Next, remove the paper table and move the paper bale to the front position. Lower the sheet feeder onto the printer so that the brackets on the sheet feed snap into place on the platen shaft. Ensure that the sheet feed rests firmly on the platen shaft. Let the sheet feed rest against the back of the printer. Move the paper bale into the rear position. Finally, plug the sheet feed cable into the top connector on the back of the printer. To load paper in the paper tray, remove it from the sheet feed by pulling it straight up. When loading paper, see that the sheets are free and that they are evenly aligned when loaded. Now push down on the paper tray tab and insert the paper. When the paper is loaded, check to see that the paper is against and under the metal stops. Align the paper against the left side of the paper tray. Now insert the paper tray into the sheet feed until you feel it snap into place. Now press the Form Feed button to feed a sheet of paper to the first writing line. Pressing the Form Feed button again will cause the paper to exit the printer. This completes the sheet feed installation and paper loading. Now stop the videotape and return to your workbook. To remove the printer cover, first turn the power switch off, disconnect the line cord, then center the carrier and move the position indicator to the left. The cover is attached by 2 cover latches on each side of the printer. To release the latches, use a small screwdriver or spring hook to push in on the tab at the bottom of each latch. Release the 2 front latches, then release the 2 latches at the rear of the printer. Next, carefully lift the cover off the printer and put it in a safe place. The control panel is attached to the bottom pan by 2 latches similar to the cover latches. Release the control panel latches and remove the panel. Disconnect the control panel connector from the function board at the rear of the machine. Next, carefully pull the cable connector under the transport mounting bracket and out of the machine. To reinstall the control panel, place the cable under the transport mounting bracket. Position the panel over the locator lugs. Then push down on the sides of the panel to latch it into position. Finally, plug the control panel connector into the function board. To replace the cover, center the carrier. Turn the power switch to the on position to prevent it from being trapped inside the cover. Then position the cover over the locator lugs. Push down on the sides of the cover to latch it into position. Turn the power switch off, then plug the line cord into the machine. The printer consists of 5 major components: the power supply, the electronics, the transport paper feed mechanism, the carrier, and the control panel. The power supply is a switching type power supply. U.S. machines operate on 110 volts AC. The primary power connector distributes line voltage to the power supply. The power supply cable distributes the output voltages from the power supply board to the printer board. The electronics are located on 2 boards: the printer board and the function board. They are connected by the system cable. The system cable distributes voltages to the function board. It is also used for communications between the printer board and the function board. The function board processes input signals from the host system, the control panel, and the SAPI switch, and sends output to the printer board. The printer board, which contains the motor drivers, receives the output from the function board and sends signals to the transport motor, the paper feed motor, the ribbon motor, and the selection motor to perform the printer operations. It then informs the function board when the operation is complete. The carrier cable connects the printer board to the carrier and is used for communication between the printer board and the carrier. Signals from the printer board control character selection, hammer solenoid operation, and ribbon feed. Let's locate the parts involved in character selection and print. The ribbon and print wheel have been removed to make the parts easier to see. These parts are the selection motor, the print hammer solenoid, the hammer, and the homing LED and the homing sensor. Let's see how the homing LED and the homing sensor operate. The homing LED is mounted on the rear of the carrier frame and emits a light at the homing sensor. This light is infrared and cannot be seen. The homing sensor reads the home position, the pitch, and the impression level of the print wheel by sensing the holes on the print wheel. Print wheel homing and the reading of the pitch and impression levels of the print wheel take place during the power-on self-test. And when the printer is placed online after a print wheel change. The printer board does 5 things during post that involve selection. The first thing the printer board does is to spin the selection motor to ensure that the selection motor hub is engaged with the print wheel. The second action of the printer board is to home the print wheel. The third and fourth actions are to electronically sense the pitch and impression level of the print wheel. Finally, the printer board lightly fires the hammer solenoid. When power-on reset is complete, the print wheel is detented in the home position. Now let's watch the POR again at normal speed. The function board takes input from the host or the printer self-test and sends output to the printer board. The printer board then selects the correct character and energizes the hammer solenoid. The hammer solenoid consists of a coil and a plunger. A magnetic field is created when voltage is applied to the coil. The magnetic field pulls the plunger into the coil and causes the other end of the plunger to drive the print hammer. The print hammer moves to the rear and drives the character pedal against the ribbon and paper. The printer board controls the impression of the characters by varying the current applied to the hammer solenoid. Let's locate the parts of the ribbon mechanism. The ribbon plate, the ribbon motor, and the end of ribbon sensor. Now let's see how the ribbon mechanism works. Immediately after a character prints, the printer board drives the ribbon feed motor, which turns the ribbon feed gear. The ribbon feed gear fits into this hub on the ribbon cassette. The ribbon is held in the print position at all times. The end of ribbon sensor and end of ribbon LED are used to stop the printer at the end of the ribbon. The end of ribbon LED emits an infrared light. The leader on the end of the ribbon allows the infrared light to reach the sensor, which places the printer offline, and the beep will sound 3 times. The LED and sensor are placed so they are aligned with this hole in the ribbon cassette. Now stop the videotape and return to your workbook. The following parts make up the transport mechanism: the transport motor bracket assembly, the transport belt, the idler pulley bracket, the homing flag, and the homing flag stop. The transport motor is responsible for all carrier movement, carrier return, tab, backspace, and escapement. The printer board determines how far to move the carrier and then drives the transport motor the correct amount dependent on the pitch of the print wheel. During POR, the transport motor moves the carrier to the left side frame, then back out to the left margin. The homing flag tells the printer board when the carrier reaches the left side frame. Let's see how this is done. When the carrier reaches the left side frame, the end of the flag hits the side frame and causes the flag to move into the carrier. When the flag moves in, it passes in front of the homing sensor, blocking the light from the LED, telling the printer board the carrier is at the left frame. Paper feed involves the following parts: the paper release lever, the paper bale load lever, the SAPI switch, the paper bale, the platen, the deflector, the feed roller assemblies, the paper feed motor, and the first line knockoff lever. There are 3 ways to initiate paper feed. The first is to use semi-automatic paper insertion, or SAPI. The second way is to use the paper up, paper down, and form feed buttons. The third way is paper feed commands from the host computer. The semi-automatic paper insertion operation is activated by closing the SAPI switch shown here. The SAPI switch is connected to the function board by connector J6, which is the SAPI connector. The SAPI switch consists of a magnet, the SAPI arm, and a reed switch. A reed switch is a set of contacts sealed inside a glass envelope. Normally, the contacts are not touching and the switch is open. When the SAPI arm is between the switch and the magnet, the switch contacts will not touch. Pulling the paper bale load lever forward moves the SAPI arm out from between the magnet and the reed switch. This allows the force of the magnet to pull the contacts together and close the switch. The SAPI switch completes a circuit through the connector on the function board. The function board then tells the printer board to perform the SAPI operation. The printer board then drives the paper feed motor to feed paper into the machine. When the paper bale is pulled forward, the first line knockoff lever engages the knockoff drive gear. As the platen rotates, the knockoff lever moves the paper bale back to the platen. Now stop the videotape and return to your workbook. When removing or replacing any frues, always turn the power switch off and disconnect the line cord. Let's start by learning how to remove the carrier, the selection plate, and the homing flag. To remove the carrier, start by turning the machine off and removing the line cord. Next, remove the ribbon and print wheel. Disconnect the carrier cable from the J4P connector on the printer board and the end of ribbon cable J1 from the function board. Work the cables out from under the frame and the clips in the base of the machine. Roll the transport belt off the transport drive pulley Do not grease the belt as this will weaken it. Use a 1/4-inch wrench to turn the right end of the carrier shaft top to rear until it just stops. Slide the carrier shaft to the right until the left end clears the side frame. Caution, the carrier shaft must be removed to the right. This prevents damage to the carrier bearings by burrs that may develop on the right end of the shaft. As you hold the carrier, slide the shaft out of the carrier to the right. Then lift the carrier out of the machine. To reinstall the carrier, set the carrier in the machine. Hold the carrier shaft so the end with the large flat is to the right. Then slide the shaft through the carrier from the right side. Next, push the carrier shaft into the right side frame. Then insert the left end of the shaft into the left side frame. Using the 1/4-inch wrench on the right end of the carrier shaft, turn the shaft top to front until it stops. Replace the transport belt. Replace the carrier cable. Slide the carrier cable under the machine frame. Replace the cable under the clips in the machine base. Then plug the carrier cable connector into J4P on the printer board. And the ribbon cable into J1 on the function board. To remove the selection plate frue, start by turning the machine off and removing the ribbon and print wheel. Next, unplug the print hammer solenoid connector from the carrier cable. Unhook the selection plate load spring from the left side of the carrier. Next, unhook the selection plate spring from the right side of the carrier. Remove the carrier, turn it over, and place it so the transport belt bracket rests on the front rail and the ribbon plate rests on the paper bale. Unplug the selection motor connector. Next, unplug the homing sensor connector from the bottom of the sensor bracket and pull the sensor connector cable out of the selection plate. Note the position of the left selection plate pivot eccentric. Remove the left selection plate pivot eccentric. Note the position of the right pivot eccentric, and then remove it. Be sure to remember which eccentric is the right and which is the left, because they are not interchangeable. The end of the homing flag sticks out through a hole in the left side of the carrier. Be careful not to damage the flag. Push the flag in and remove the selection plate from the carrier. Let's examine the selection plate while it is out of the machine. Note the position of the homing sensor. This is the homing flag. Notice how it passes in front of the sensor as it moves in. To remove the flag from the selection plate, use the blade of a screwdriver and carefully snap the flag out of its mounting. Now work the flag out of its mounting bracket to the right. To reinstall the flag, slip the end of the flag into the homing sensor bracket. Use a spring hook to line up the top of the flag with the top of the homing sensor bracket and release the flag. Then snap it into its mounting bracket. This is the print hammer solenoid. Notice how it pushes the hammer when the plunger moves in. To reinstall the selection plate through, set it into the bottom of the carrier, being careful not to damage the flag. Next, install the right selection plate pivot eccentric. The right eccentric has the narrower shoulder. Align the reference mark with the edge of the carrier casting and tighten the screw. Install the left selection plate pivot eccentric and align the reference mark with the edge of the carrier casting. Again, install and tighten the screw. Now reconnect the homing sensor connector to the homing sensor on the bottom of the selection plate. Next, connect the selection motor connector. Reinstall the carrier in the machine. Be sure to position the cable so that none of the connectors hang out of the bottom of the carrier and that the cables do not interfere with any moving parts. Next, connect the hammer solenoid connector. Reconnect the selection plate spring. Reconnect the selection plate load spring. Make sure all wires are away from the springs and that the hammer solenoid is free to operate. This completes the carrier and selection plate removals. Let's see how the ribbon plate is removed. Start by removing the ribbon cassette. Next, disconnect the ribbon feed motor connector. Now remove this C-clip. And the ribbon plate adjusting screw. Slide the ribbon plate to the right and lift it from the machine. Be careful not to lose this spacer. To install the ribbon plate, place the ribbon plate on the carrier so the narrow areas on the ribbon plate shaft fit into the cutouts on the carrier frame as shown. Install the bowed C-clip with the bow to the right. Reconnect the ribbon feed motor connector. Now, carefully place the spacer behind the ribbon mounting plate and replace the screw. Do not tighten this screw at this time. The ribbon plate height must now be adjusted. Place the ribbon cassette on the ribbon plate. In the next step, you will adjust the ribbon plate height so the closed bracket and the underscore print an equal distance from the top and bottom of the ribbon. When this is achieved, tighten the adjusting screw. This completes ribbon plate removal. To remove the end of ribbon sensor, first unplug the end of ribbon sensor connector from the carrier cable. Next, remove the mounting screw. And lift the sensor from the machine. The end of ribbon sensor consists of an LED and a light sensing device. To reinstall the end of ribbon sensor, simply set the sensor in place, install the mounting screw, and plug the sensor connector into the carrier cable. To adjust the end of ribbon sensor, place a metric scale parallel with the tabletop and in line with the top of the red line on the card holder. Pivot the end of ribbon sensor until it is 11 millimeters from the card holder and then tighten the mounting screw. Now, stop the videotape and return to your workbook. Let's see how to remove the transport motor bracket. Start by removing the control panel. Next, disconnect the transport motor connector J2P. Then, roll the transport belt off the drive pulley. Use a screwdriver to release the two front frame latches as shown. Hold the front of the frame assembly up so you can remove the two front transport motor bracket mounting screws. Next, remove the two right side transport motor bracket mounting screws. Loosen the left printer board mounting screw. Then remove the function board mounting screw and the right printer board mounting screw. Pivot the electronics board to the rear as shown. Move the transport motor bracket assembly to the rear and lift it out of the machine. The transport shaft tension spring in the transport motor bracket falls out easily. Make sure it is in place before installing the transport motor bracket in the machine. Work the transport motor bracket into place. Then, install the printer and function board mounting screws. Next, install the 4 transport motor bracket mounting screws, but do not tighten them at this time. Hold the transport motor bracket down and to the front while you tighten the right side mounting screws. Now tighten the 2 front mounting screws and snap the frame into the mounting latches. Install the transport belt. Then plug the transport motor connector J2P into the printer board. Now let's see how the transport belt adjustment is performed. Let's start by moving the carrier all the way to the right. Next, loosen the idler pulley bracket mounting screws. Trap the carrier cable beneath the carrier during this adjustment. Then slide the T-bender over the top of the transport belt at its center and rest the T-bender on the front shaft. Place the spring scale on the T-bender 30 millimeters from the center of the shaft, apply 6 pounds of pressure on the T-bender, and turn the adjusting screw in or out so that the bottom of the T-bender just touches the bottom transport belt. When the adjustment is correct, tighten the idler pulley bracket. Reposition the carrier cable previously placed under the carrier. Finally, replace the control panel. This completes the transport belt adjustment. This is the paper feed motor. Let's look at the removal procedure for this motor. Turn the machine off, disconnect the line cord, and move the carrier to the center of the machine. Remove the platen by squeezing the left and right platen latches and lift the platen from the machine. Unplug the paper feed motor connector J3P. This is the paper feed motor load spring. Disconnect the load spring. This spring loads the paper feed motor against the platen, which eliminates excessive motion to ensure precise paper feed. These are the 2 mounting screws for the paper feed motor. Remove these 2 screws. Now work the paper feed motor out of the machine. To reinstall the paper feed motor, place it in the machine so the mounting screw shown here fits into the cutout portion of the machine frame. Install the 2 shouldered mounting screws. Make sure the shoulders of the mounting screws do not tighten down on the machine frame. The paper feed motor should move easily when both screws are tight. Reconnect the load spring on the paper feed motor. Reconnect the paper feed motor connector J3P to the printer board. Place the motor wires into the rear clip on the transformer bracket to ensure they do not interfere with the paper feed mechanism. Finally, replace the platen. Now let's see how to remove the paper feed assembly. First, remove the deflector. Press down on the center of the paper feed roller assembly and rotate it top to front and lift it from the machine. The leaf spring provides the feed roller pressure on the platen. Anytime you have to replace defective feed rolls, always replace both paper feed roller assemblies. To reinstall the paper feed roller assembly, place it in the machine as shown. Make sure the slots in the left end of the assembly are aligned with the slot in the collar. Press on the middle of the assembly and rotate it top to rear until the arms on the bottom of the assembly come through the holes in the frame. Then release the assembly. Before installing the platen, be sure that the deflector is properly seated. Set the platen in the machine with the paper handler drive gear to the right. Push down on both ends of the platen to snap the platen latches into place. The paper bail arms are held in place by these tabs. The first writing line knockoff is mounted behind the left paper bail arm. To remove the first writing line knockoff, first disconnect the paper bail arm toggle spring. Clip the holding tabs on the paper bail arm. Then remove the paper bail arm. Anytime you remove either paper bail arm, you will have to replace it with a new one. Remove the first writing line knockoff. Now, reinstall the first writing line knockoff. Make sure it is in contact with the drive gear. Replace the paper bail arm with a new one. Push the arm onto the shaft until the holding tabs snap into place. Then replace the toggle spring. This completes paper feed removals. Now stop the videotape and return to your workbook. The major electronic frues are the switch tower transformer frue, the power supply board, the printer board, and the function board. To remove the switch tower and power supply from the machine, make sure that the machine is turned off and the line cord is disconnected. To remove the switch tower frue, remove these two mounting screws. Next, remove the two power supply mounting screws. These are at the left front and right rear of the transformer. Remove the power supply cable J6P from the printer board. Remove the paper feed motor wires from the clip on the transformer. Now lift the power supply and switch tower straight up and out of the machine. To separate the switch tower and transformer from the power supply board, remove these two screws. And disconnect the transformer connector J2. Now let's see how the primary fuse and power switch are replaced. The switch tower contains a 1 1/2 amp primary fuse. Grasp the switch tower and work the fuse block down and away from the switch tower. This is the primary power fuse. Always replace fuses with a fuse of the proper value. The fuse block is replaced by sliding it back into place on the switch tower. The power switch is a frue. To replace the switch, first remove the handle by removing this pin. Next, use a small screwdriver to release the switch mounting latches at the top of the switch tower. Now use your meter lead to release the wires from the switch. To replace the switch, place the wires into the switch, then slide the switch into the switch tower until it latches into place. Next, place the switch handle on the switch and replace the mounting pin. To reassemble the power supply, reconnect J2 to the power supply board. Then replace the transformer on the power supply board mounting bracket and replace the two mounting screws. Position the switch tower onto the power supply frue. Next, place the switch tower and power supply board into the machine. Replace the 2 power supply mounting screws and the 2 switch tower mounting screws. Replace the paper feed motor wires on the transformer clip. Replace the power supply connector J6P. This completes power supply removal. When removing the function board, the ESD strap is connected as shown. For the purposes of this video, we will not use the ESD strap. In this procedure, we will remove these boards. First, remove all of the connectors on the printer board. Next, remove all of the connectors on the function board. Remove these 2 screws to release the function board. Next, lift the right corner of the function board and pull it from the machine. The function board bracket extends into this slot in the printer board bracket to allow ease of removal. When removing the printer board, clip the ESD strap as shown. Again, for the purpose of this video, we will not use the ESD strap. To release the printer board, remove these 2 screws. Now lift the printer board out of the machine. It will not be necessary to remove the boards from the mounting brackets. All new printer and function boards will include brackets. When replacing the electronic boards, be sure all mounting screws are tight and all connectors are in place. This completes the removal and replacement of the printer and function boards. Stop the videotape and return to your workbook. Service documentation for the Wheelprinter E is contained in the Hardware Maintenance and Service Manual. This manual uses problem isolation charts, or PICs, to help you diagnose a problem. A PIC includes all the information necessary to check the individual parts of the printer. Always start with the printer entry PIC. First, check for the obvious failures, such as loose or broken parts. If there is no obvious failure, then perform a functional check. Start the functional check with post. Make sure the power switch is off, manually center the carrier, then turn the power switch on. The machine should successfully complete POR. The semi-automatic paper insertion feature should load a sheet of paper into the printer to the first writing line. Press the stop button. The on-line LED turns off and the carrier moves to the right. Be sure that the paper up and paper down buttons and the micro up and micro down functions operate correctly. When you press the Form Feed button, the paper advances to the end of the page. The next step is to run the printer self-test. Load a sheet of paper. Then turn the power switch off. Hold the stop button and turn the power switch back on to start the test. The first line of the printer self-test provides information to the operator. The zeros and ones making up the first group of characters shows the dip switch settings. A 1 means the switch is on, and a 0 means the switch is off. The numbers on the right identify the engineering level of the function board. The remainder of the printout is a continuous type sample of all the characters on the print wheel. To exit the printer self-test, turn the power switch off. This completes the functional check. This section will introduce you to several diagnostic procedures used on this machine. We will start with diagnostic procedures for the power supply. Let's see how to check the output voltage of the power supply. The power supply provides 5 volts DC, minus 5 volts DC, 15 volts DC, and 34 volts DC. First, turn the power off. Next, unplug the power supply connector. To read these voltages, set your meter on the 12-volt DC scale. Then turn the machine on. J6P has a blocked pin at each end of the connector to ensure that the connector will be plugged onto the board correctly. These blocked positions are not counted in the pin numbering system. When taking power supply readings with the power supply connector J6P disconnected, you must use the power supply ground on pin 2 of the J6P connector. The reading from power supply ground to the VRAM signal should read 4.6 to 5.6 volts DC. Set your meter to the negative polarity position. Because the minus 5 volt pin is to the right of the ground pin, the red lead is now on the right of your screen. You should read from minus 4.6 to minus 5.6 volts DC. Now set your meter polarity switch back to the positive position. The plus 5 volt pin should measure 4.6 to 5.6 volts DC. Next, move the positive lead of your meter to the 30 volt DC jack. The 15 volt pin should measure 13.2 to 15.6 volts DC. For the 34 volt pin, move your meter lead to the 60 volt DC jack. The 34 volt pin should measure 27.2 to 46.9 volts DC. When the readings are complete, turn the power switch off and reconnect the J6P connector to the printer board. There is only one fuse in this machine, the primary power fuse. To check this fuse, it is necessary to remove the switch tower. To check a fuse, set your meter to the R times 1 scale. Remove the fuse from the fuse block and check for continuity across the fuse. After checking the fuse and J6P, be sure all connectors are on tight and the switch tower is in place. This concludes the power supply checks. In this section, we will discuss some of the diagnostic checks done on the printer board. First, let's locate the connectors on the printer board. The platen and feed rolls have been removed to make the parts easier to see. This is the transport motor connector J2P. Note that there are 6 pins on the printer board and 8 pins on the connector. The pin on each end of the connector is blocked so that the connector cannot be plugged in wrong. The connector plugs into the board with the printing on the connector facing up. This is the paper feed motor connector J3P. Like the transport motor connector, this connector has a blank pin on each side. This is the carrier cable connector J4P. There are 22 pins in the carrier cable connector. The signal names for both sets of pins are printed on the top of the carrier cable. These are the signal names for the upper row of pins, and these are the signal names for the lower row of pins. All the electronically driven components in the carrier are connected to the printer board through the carrier cable. This is the system cable connector J5P. The system cable connects the printer board to the function board. This is the power supply connector J6P. The power supply and system cable connectors have a blank pin on each side of the connector. Removal of the transport motor connector allows access to the sense pad. The sense pad is used to check for the correct operation of the homing sensor. Let's see how this is done. Connect the common meter lead to frame ground. Then turn the machine on. With the meter set on the 12-volt DC scale, place the VOM meter lead on the sense pad. When the homing sensor is not blocked, the meter should read from 3 to 5 volts DC. Press the homing flag in slowly. When the flag blocks the homing sensor, the meter should read from 0 to 1 volt DC. Turn the machine off and reinstall the transport motor plug. Next, we will look at the diagnostic check for the function board. First, we will locate the function board connectors. This is J1 on the function board, the end of ribbon sensor connector. It is a 5-pin connector with locator lugs at the top and bottom. This is the system cable J2. J2 has 11 pins. Note that a pin is blocked at each end so the connector cannot be plugged in wrong. This is the control panel connector J3. To check a cable to see if it is bad, be sure the power is turned off. Unplug one end of the cable to be checked. Here we are checking the control panel cable, so we will remove the panel to reach the LED circuit board. Now check the continuity of each pin from one end of the cable to the other. Anytime you perform a continuity check of a cable, the power must be off and one end of the cable must be unplugged. Now stop the videotape and return to your workbook. To check an LED, turn the power on and use a meter lead to short the pin on the J3 connector for each LED to ground. This will turn the LED on. The button check is used to isolate failing buttons. Turn the power switch off and disconnect J3 from the function board. With the meter on the 1 k-ohm scale, measure the resistance between ground, J3 pin 12, and the pin of the failing button. The needle should move from infinity to less than 100 ohms when the button is pressed. If the button is bad, replace the control panel. If the button checks good, measure the resistance of all other buttons with no buttons pressed. If the meter measures infinity on all buttons, replace the function board. To perform the transport motor resistance check, turn the machine off and unplug the transport motor connector J2P. Carefully zero the meter on the R×1 scale. These are critical measurements. Your meter must be correctly adjusted. Now check the resistance from pin 1, EA+, to pin 4, EA, on the transport motor connector. The resistance must read from 4 to 6 ohms. The resistance readings should be in the same range for pin 5 to pin 2, EC+ to EC, and pin 3 to pin 6, EB+ and EB. Next, check the resistance from each pin on the connector to the motor housing. There must be no continuity from the pins to the motor housing. This ensures that there is not a short in the motor. The selection motor resistance check is done through the carrier cable. To perform the resistance check of the selection motor, unplug the carrier cable. Carefully zero your meter, and then measure from pin 3 to pin 6, SA+ to SA. The resistance must be from 4 to 6 ohms. Check the resistance from pin 4 to pin 7, SC to SC+, and from pin 8 to pin 5, SB to SB+. Next, check to be sure that there is no continuity between the motor housing and the selection motor pins on the carrier cable. In order to perform the ribbon feed motor resistance check, you would plug one of your meter leads in the test connector on the motor and measure the resistance from the test connector to each of the feed motor pins on the lower side of the carrier cable connector. The resistance check for the paper feed motor is performed in the same way as the transport motor resistance check. This section covers checks of some of the parts in the carrier. To check the hammer solenoid, you must first perform a resistance check of the solenoid. Carefully zero your meter on the R×1 scale. Remember to turn the power off. When you adjusted your meter, measure the hammer solenoid resistance from pin 1 to pin 2 on the carrier cable connector J4P. The hammer solenoid must read from 2 ohms to 4 ohms. Any reading higher than 4 ohms or lower than 2 ohms will indicate a defective solenoid. Next, check to be sure that there is no continuity between the solenoid housing to either pins 1 or 2 of the carrier connector. To check the homing LED, measure the resistance of the LED in both directions. Using the ×1 k-ohm scale, put the common lead on pin 10 and the VOM lead on pin 9. The meter should not read continuity. Next, reverse the meter leads on the connector pins. The meter should now read in the mid-range on the ohm scale. Be sure all the cable connectors are securely fastened and the cables are positioned so they do not hang from the bottom of the carrier and do not interfere with any moving parts. This completes the diagnostic check section. Stop the videotape and return to your workbook.